Module 3, Statistical Reasoning in Everyday Life. For psychological scientists, statistics are important tools. Yet a basic ability to understand statistics can benefit anyone. To be an educated critical thinker is to apply simple statistical principles to everyday reasoning. And there's good news: to think smarter about data, we needn't memorize complicated formulas. We need merely to be statistically literate. Statistical literacy. Learning objective question LOQ 3-1. Why does statistical literacy matter? A lack of statistical literacy can mislead the public by feeding needless health scares, for example, Geiger 2010. In the 1990s, the British press reported a study showing that women taking a particular contraceptive pill had a 100% increased risk of blood clots that could produce strokes. The story went viral, causing thousands of women to stop taking the pill. What happened as a result? A wave of unwanted pregnancies and an estimated 13,000 additional abortions, which, like other medical procedures, also are associated with increased blood clot risk. Distracted by big, round numbers, few people focused on the study's actual findings: a 100% increased risk, indeed, but only from 1 in 7,000 to 2 in 7,000. Such false alarms underscore the need to think critically, to teach statistical reasoning, and to present statistical information more transparently. Statistical misinformation also gets fed by off-the-top-of-the-head estimates. Someone throws out a big, round number. Others echo it, and before long the big, round number becomes public misinformation. 3 examples. 10% of people are gay. Or is it 2 to 4%, as suggested by various national surveys? More on this in the Nature, Nurture, and Human Diversity modules. We ordinarily use only 10% of our brain. Or is it closer to 100%? More on this in the Biology of Mind modules. To be healthy, walk 10,000 steps a day. Or will 8,500 or 13,000 steps do the trick? How about swimming or jogging? Mull, 2019. If you find an attention-grabbing headline presented without evidence that nationally there are 1 million teen pregnancies, 2 million homeless seniors, or 3 million alcohol-related motor vehicle accidents, you can be pretty sure that someone is estimating. If they want to emphasize the problem, they will be motivated to estimate high. If they want to minimize the problem, they will estimate low. The point to remember: think critically when you encounter big, round, undocumented numbers. When setting goals, we love big, round numbers. We're far more likely to want to lose 20 pounds than 19 or 21 pounds, or an even 10 kilograms rather than 9.07 kilograms. And US high school students are more likely to retake the Scholastic Aptitude Test, SAT, if they score just below a multiple of 100, what researchers call left-digit bias. Given the attention to the leftmost digits, a 1,290 may seem far lower than a 1,300, despite the trivial difference in points. Goodman et al., 2020. Descriptive statistics. Once researchers have gathered their data, they may organize that data using descriptive statistics. One way to do this is to convert the data into a simple bar graph, as in Figure 3.1, which displays a distribution of different brands of trucks still on the road after a decade. When reading statistical graphs such as this one, take care. It's easy to design a graph to make a difference seem big, Figure 3.1a, or small, Figure 3.1b. The secret lies in how you label the vertical scale, the y-axis. The point to remember: think smart. When interpreting graphs, consider the scale labels and note their range. Ask yourself, Think of a time when you used statistics to make a point, maybe in class, in a paper, or in a discussion with a friend or family member. Looking back, were the data you cited credible and accurate? How do you know? Retrieval practice. 2 graphs labeled A and B plot the percentage of different truck brands still functioning after 10 years, and a photo between the graphs shows a truck. Figure 3.1. Read the scale labels. Follow link for extended description of Figure 3.1. Read the scale labels. Answers in Appendix E. Measures of central tendency. LOQ 3-2. How do we describe data using 3 measures of central tendency? The next step is to summarize the data using a measure of central tendency, a single score that represents a whole distribution of scores. The simplest measure is the mode, the most frequently occurring score or scores. A bimodal distribution occurs when there are 2 most frequently occurring scores. What is your favorite number? One global survey found that the most frequently occurring response, the mode, was 7, Belos, 2014. Was that yours? The most familiar measure is the mean, or arithmetic average, the total sum of all the scores divided by the number of scores. The midpoint, the 50th percentile, is the median. On a divided highway, the median is the middle. So, too, with data, if you arrange all the scores in order from the highest to the lowest, half will be above the median and half will be below it. Measures of central tendency neatly summarize data. But consider what happens to the mean when a distribution is lopsided, when it's skewed by a few way out scores. With income data, for example, the mode, median, and mean often tell very different stories. Figure 3.2. This happens because a few extreme incomes bias the mean. When Warren Buffett, one of the world's richest people, sits down in a small cafe, its average, mean, customer instantly becomes a billionaire. But median customer wealth remains unchanged. Understanding this, it's clear why, according to the 2020 U.S. Census, over 60% of U.S. households have below average income. The bottom half of earners receive much less than half of the total national income. So, most Americans make less than average, the mean. Mean and median tell different true stories. Think of it this way: calling someone average is a mean thing. A graph in the form of a balance scale shows a village's income in 3 measures: mean, median, and mode. Figure 3.2. A skewed distribution. This graphic representation of the distribution of a village's incomes illustrates the 3 measures of central tendency: mode, median, and mean. Note how just a few high incomes make the mean the fulcrum point that balances the incomes above and below deceptively high. Follow link for extended description of Figure 3.2. A skewed distribution. The point to remember: always note which measure of central tendency is reported. If it is a mean, consider whether a few atypical scores could be distorting it. A cartoon shows 2 men standing outside at a bus stop, dressed in coats and hats, during blustery weather with a cloud above them. Follow link for extended description of normal temperature. The average person has 1 ovary and 1 testicle. Measures of variation. LOQ 3-3. What is the relative usefulness of the 2 measures of variation? Knowing the value of an appropriate measure of central tendency can tell us a great deal. But the single number omits other information. It helps to know something about the amount of variation in the data, how similar or diverse the scores are. Averages derived from scores with low variability are more reliable than averages based on scores with high variability. Consider a basketball player who scored between 13 and 17 points in each of the season's first 10 games. Knowing this, we would be more confident that the player would score near 15 points in the next game than if those scores had varied from 5 to 25 points. The range of scores, the difference between the lowest and highest, provides only a crude estimate of variation. A couple of extreme scores in an otherwise similar group, such as the $950,000 and $1,420,000 incomes in Figure 3.2, will create a deceptively large range. It's good to know the range of scores, but we often want to know how much scores vary in relation to a population's average. The standard deviation measures how much scores differ, from the mean. It better gauges whether scores are packed together or dispersed, because it uses information from each score. The standard deviation is derived from a mathematical formula that assembles information about how much individual scores differ from the mean, which can be very telling. Let's say test scores from Class A and Class B both have the same mean, 75% correct, but very different standard deviations, 5.0 for Class A and 15.0 for Class B. Have you ever had test experiences like that where 2/3 of your classmates in one course score in the 70 to 80% range, with scores in another course more spread out, 2/3 between 60 and 90%? The standard deviation, as well as the mean score, tell us about how each class is faring. The actual standard deviation formula is the square root of the fraction with numerator the sum of open paren x sub I minus x bar close paren squared and denominator n-1. You can grasp the meaning of the standard deviation if you consider how scores naturally tend to be distributed. Large numbers of data heights, intelligence scores, life expectancy, though not incomes, often form a symmetrical, bell-shaped distribution. Most cases fall near the mean, and fewer cases fall near either extreme. This bell-shaped distribution is so typical that we call the curve it forms the normal curve. As Figure 3.3 shows, a useful property of the normal curve is that roughly 68% of the cases fall within one standard deviation on either side of the mean. About 95% of cases fall within two standard deviations. Thus, as we discuss in the intelligence modules, about 68% of people taking an intelligence test will score within 15 points either above or below of 100. About 95% will score within plus or minus 30 points. A graph shows a bell-shaped curve that plots the number of scores against Wechsler intelligence scores. Figure 3.3 The normal curve scores on aptitude tests tend to form a normal, or bell-shaped, curve. The most commonly used intelligence test, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, calls the average score 100. Follow link for extended description of Figure 3.3 The normal curve. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Inferential statistics. LOQ 3-4. How do we know whether an observed difference can be generalized to other populations? From moment to moment, people's behaviors may vary. Thus, one group's average score could conceivably differ from another group's average score not because of any real difference, but merely because of chance fluctuations in the people sampled. Inferential statistics use the results from a sample to inform us about a larger population, everybody in some group. When we infer that our sample's difference reflects a true population difference, we are saying the difference is statistically significant. When we conclude that our sample's difference is likely just a fluke, we're saying it's not statistically significant. We will focus only on this part of inferential statistics. Significant differences. Imagine a prospective student who visits two similar universities. At the first school, the student randomly samples two classes and finds that both instructors are witty and engaging. At the second school, the two sampled instructors seem dull and uninspiring. Should the student conclude that the first school's teachers are great and the second school's teachers are bores? You might respond that the student should sample more classes, and you'd be right. It's possible that the populations of teachers at the two universities are equal. Just by chance, the student could have sampled two great, and two boring, teachers. How confidently can we infer that some observed difference in a sample, such as a couple of teachers, reflects the larger population it comes from, all the teachers at the school? In deciding when it is safe to infer a population difference from a sample difference, we should keep three principles in mind. Representative samples are better than biased, unrepresentative samples. The best basis for generalizing is not from the exceptional and memorable cases one finds at the extremes, but from a representative sample of cases. Research never randomly samples the whole human population. Thus, it pays to keep in mind what population a study has sampled. Bigger samples are better than smaller ones. We know it, but we ignore it. Averages based on many cases are more reliable than averages based on only a few. If you select a certain instructor's class based on conversations with 3 people, you can't conclude much. A set of 50 class evaluations will give you a better estimate of an instructor's performance. More, randomly sampled, cases make the sample's estimate more reliable. Larger samples also make for a more replaceable study, one that will find a similar estimate the next time. More estimates are better than fewer estimates. A study gives one brief peek at what's going on in the population. But the best thing to do is conduct multiple studies and combine all the estimates using meta-analysis. Better to consider an entire forest of findings rather than focusing on a single study. The point to remember: smart thinkers are not overly impressed by a few anecdotes. Estimates based on a few unrepresentative cases are unreliable. Let's consider another significant differences example. Say you sampled men's and women's scores on a laboratory test of aggression and found a gender difference. But samples can vary. So how likely is it that your observed gender difference was just a fluke? Researchers use statistical testing to estimate the probability of the result occurring by chance. They begin with the assumption that no difference exists between groups, an assumption called the null hypothesis. Then, using statistics, they evaluate the observed gender difference. If the difference is large enough, they reject the null hypothesis of no differences, and they say that the result is statistically significant. Such a large difference would support an alternative hypothesis that the populations of men and women really do differ in aggression. A 5-panel Peanuts cartoon shows Charlie Brown and Lucy playing baseball. Follow link for extended description of significant differences. What factors determine statistical significance? When averages from 2 samples are each reliable measures of their respective populations, as when each is based on many observations that have low variability, then any difference between the 2 samples is more likely to be statistically significant. For our example, the more aggression scores we observe, and the less the variability in the scores of men and in the scores of women, the more confidence we would have that our observed gender difference is real. When the estimated difference is large, it's also more likely to reflect a real difference in the population. In short, when estimates are reliable and when the difference between them is relatively large, we're more likely to find that the difference is statistically significant. This means that the observed difference in the sample is probably more than just chance variation, so we reject the original null hypothesis of no existing differences. In judging statistical significance, psychologists are conservative. They are like juries that must presume innocence until guilt is proven. Many psychological tests provide p-values, which indicate the probability of the result, given the null hypothesis. For most psychologists, strong evidence that we can reject the null, no difference, hypothesis occurs when the probability, p-value, of that result is very low. Very low is usually set at less than 5%, p.05. When a sample's result would occur less than 5% of the time assuming the null hypothesis, we say it is significant. When learning about research, you should remember that a statistically significant result may have little practical significance. Especially when a sample is very large, a result might be statistically significant but have a tiny effect size. One large study examined intelligence and birth order. Researchers revealed a statistically significant tendency for those who were first-born children to have higher average scores than their later-born siblings, Rohrer et al., 2015, Zajonc and Marcus, 1975. But the difference was only about 1.5 IQ points. There were 20,000 people in the study, so this difference was significant, but it had little practical importance. The point to remember: statistical significance indicates the likelihood that the result would have happened by chance if the null hypothesis, of no difference, were true. But statistically significant is not the same as important or strong. Ask yourself: can you think of a situation where you were fooled by a writer or speaker's attempts to persuade you with statistics? What have you learned in this module that will be most helpful in the future to avoid being misled? Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Review. Module 3, Statistical Reasoning in Everyday Life. Learning Objectives. Test yourself. Answer these repeated learning objective questions on your own, before showing the answers here, or checking the answers in Appendix D, to improve your retention of the concepts. McDaniel et al., 2009, 2015. Terms and concepts to remember. Test yourself. Write down the definition in your own words, then check your answer. Statistics. Descriptive statistics. Mode. Mean. Median. Range. Standard deviation. Normal curve. Inferential statistics. Statistical significance. Module test. Test yourself. Answer the following questions on your own first, then show the answers here, or check your answers in Appendix E. Continue testing yourself in Logo, Achieve. To learn and remember most effectively. Chapter 2: The Biology of Mind, Modules 4 to 7. A scan shows the side profile of a human skull with a multicolored image of the brain's interconnected network of neurons. Module 4: Neural and Hormonal Systems. Biology, Behavior, and Mind. The power of neuroplasticity. Neural communication. The nervous system. The endocrine system. Module 5: Tools of Discovery, Having Our Head Examined. Module 6: Brain Regions and Structures. The brainstem. The thalamus. The reticular formation. The cerebellum. The limbic system. The cerebral cortex. Thinking critically about: do we use only 10% of our brain? Module 7: Damage Responses and Brain Hemispheres. Responses to damage. The divided brain. Wang Huanming, a man paralyzed from the neck down in a 2010 wrestling accident, made news when he volunteered to participate in an audacious medical venture, a head transplant. A transplant surgeon has offered to surgically transfer Wang's fully functioning head to a brain-dead person's still functioning body. Tatlo, 2016. Ignore for the moment the ethical issues of such an experiment, which some have called reckless and ghastly and part of the scientists' ghoulish fantasies. Ills and MacDonald, 2017, Walp, 2018. Ignore the procedure's cost, estimated at up to $100 million, Hjulmgiard, 2019. And ignore the seeming impossibility of precisely connecting the head to spinal cord nerves. Imagine, just imagine, that the procedure could work. With the same brain and a new body, would Wang still be Wang? To whose home should he return? If the old Wang was a skilled guitarist, would the new Wang conceivably retain that skill, or would he have to train his new body to play? If he later fathered a child, whom should the birth certificate list as the parent? Most of us 21st century people, you, too, presume that, even with a new body, Wang would still be Wang. We presume that our brain, designed by our genes and sculpted by our experiences, provides our identity and enables our mind. No brain, no mind. We are, indeed, living brains, but more. We are bodies alive. No principle is more central to today's psychology, or to this book, than this: everything psychological is simultaneously biological. Your every idea, every mood, every urge is also a biological happening. You love, laugh, and cry with your body. Thinking, feeling, or acting without a body would be like running without legs. Without your body, your genes, your nervous system, your hormones, your appearance, you truly would be nobody. Moreover, your body and your brain influence and are influenced by your experiences. Throughout this book, you will find many examples of the interplay between biology and psychology. As you will also see throughout this book, we humans share the same basic biological design. Yet thanks to our individual genes, experiences, and cultural traditions and teachings, we differ from one another. Our traits and behaviors arise from the interaction of nature and nurture. Our thoughts, feelings, and actions influence our blood pressure, hormones, and brain. As we wend our way from the cradle to the grave, our biology changes in response to our behaviors and environments. In these Biology of Mind modules, we ask a profound question: how does matter make mind? To answer this question, we explore the mind's biology. We start small and build from the bottom up, from nerve cells up to the brain. But we'll also discuss how our behavior and environment can influence our biology from the top down. Life changes us. You've heard it before and will hear it again: nurture works on what nature provides. Module 4, Neural and Hormonal Systems. Let's begin by exploring why psychologists study biology and how their scientific discoveries have improved our understanding of how matter makes mind. Biology, behavior, and mind. Learning objective question LOQ 4-1. Why are psychologists concerned with human biology? Our understanding of the relationship between brain and mind has come a long way. The ancient Greek physician, Hippocrates, correctly located the mind in the brain. His contemporary, the philosopher Aristotle, believed the mind was in the heart, which pumps warmth and vitality to the body. The heart remains our symbol for love, but psychological science has long since taught us an important lesson: it's your brain, not your heart, that falls in love. A cartoon shows a physician standing next to a hospital bed. On the bed is a patient with the head of a man and the body of a baboon. The doctor says to the patient, "A baboon heart transplant wouldn't have been enough. Your whole body was pretty much shot." In the early 1800s, German physician Franz Gall proposed that phrenology, studying bumps on the skull, could reveal a person's mental abilities and character traits. Figure 4.1. At one point, Britain had 29 phrenological societies. Phrenologists also traveled North America to give skull readings. Dean, 2012, Hunt, 1993. Using a false name, writer Mark Twain put one famous phrenologist to the test. He found a cavity and startled me by saying that that cavity represented the total absence of the sense of humor. 3 months later, Twain sat for a second reading, this time identifying himself. Now the cavity was gone, and in its place was the loftiest bump of humor he had ever encountered in his lifelong experience. Lopez, 2002. The science of phrenology remains known today as a reminder of our need for critical thinking and scientific analysis. Phrenology did at least succeed in focusing attention on the localization of function, the idea that various brain regions have particular functions. 2 illustrations show the lateral view of a human head, highlighting the brain to compare Franz Gall's 19th century theory versus the current understanding of the brain. Figure 4.1 A wrong-headed theory. A. Despite initial acceptance of Franz Gall's speculations, bumps on the skull tell us nothing about the brain's underlying functions. Nevertheless, some of his assumptions have held true. Though they are not the functions Gall proposed, different parts of the brain do contribute to different aspects of behavior, as suggested in B. From the Human Brain book, and as you will see throughout these Biology of Mind modules. Follow link for extended description of Figure 4.1 A wrong-headed theory. Today's psychologists live in a world that Gall could only dream about. Biological psychologists use advanced technologies to study the links between biological, genetic, neural, hormonal, processes and psychological processes. They and other researchers working from a biological perspective are announcing discoveries about the interplay of our biology and our behavior and mind at an exhilarating pace. Within little more than the past century, researchers seeking to understand the biology of the mind have discovered that our experiences wire our adaptive brain. Among the body's cells are nerve cells that conduct electricity and talk to one another by sending chemical messages across a tiny gap that separates them. Specific brain systems serve specific functions, though not the functions Gall supposed. We integrate information processed in these different brain systems to construct our experience of sights and sounds, meanings and memories, pain and passion. Our emotions, like our thoughts and memories, are supported by brain networks. We have also realized that we are each a system composed of subsystems that are, in turn, composed of even smaller subsystems. Tiny cells organize to form body organs. These organs form larger systems for digestion, circulation, and information processing. And those systems are part of an even larger system, the person, who in turn is a part of a family, community, and culture. Thus, we are biopsychosocial systems. Engel, 1981. To understand our behavior, we need to study how these biological, psychological, and social cultural systems work and interact, and how they form us over time. We are formed by ancient evolution, by our enduring cultures, by our daily experiences, by our fluctuating hormones, and by our immediate neural activity. Sapolsky, 2017. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. The power of neuroplasticity. LOQ 4-2. How do biology and experience together enable neuroplasticity? Your brain is sculpted not only by your genes but also by your life. Under the surface of your awareness, your brain constantly changes, building new pathways as it adjusts to new experiences. This neural change is called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is greatest early in life but continues over the lifespan. Lindenberger and Lovedan, 2019, Whalesek et al., 2022. To see neuroplasticity at work, consider London's taxi driver trainees. They spend years learning and remembering the city's 26,000 street locations and connections. For the half who pass the difficult final test, big rewards are in store, a better income and an enlarged hippocampus, one of the brain's memory centers that processes spatial memories. London's bus drivers, who navigate a smaller set of roads, gain no similar neural rewards. Griesbauer et al., 2022, Maguire et al., 2000. A photo shows Eric Y. Henmayer climbing an icy mountainside using a rope and climbing gear. The mind's eye Eric Y. Henmayer, who is completely blind, has rappelled into active volcanoes and summit the tallest mountain peaks on every continent. Chestnut, 2013, Valizzo, 2021. To stay safe, he uses a guide and echolocation, the navigation method used by bats. Sulzer et al., 2022. Blind echolocation engages the brain's visual centers, the same centers that sighted people use when looking at stimuli. Norman and Thaler, 2019. Why Henmayer's flexible brain transforms sound to help him see. We also see neuroplasticity in well-practiced pianists, who have a larger than usual auditory cortex area, a sound processing region. Babelier et al., 2000, Pantaf et al., 1998. Practice likewise sculpts the brains of ballerinas, jugglers, and unicyclists. Dragansky et al., 2004, Hangi et al., 2010, Weber et al., 2019. Your brain is a work in progress. The brain you were born with is not the brain you will die with. Even limited practice times may produce neural benefits. If you spend 45 minutes learning how to play the piano, as did participants in one study, you may grow your motor learning related brain areas. Taver et al., 2020. Mere minutes of word learning produce subtle brain changes. Vukovic et al., 2021. Remember that the next time you attend class. Neuroplasticity underlies interventions aimed at reducing child poverty. In one experiment, families experiencing poverty with a newborn baby were randomly assigned to receive either large, $333, or small, $20, unconditional monthly cash transfers. Troller and Free et al., 2022. A year later, researchers examined how the children's brain activity adapted to these financial changes in their family environment. Compared with children whose families received small cash transfers, those whose families received large cash transfers showed more brain activity in regions associated with language, thinking, and social understanding. Neuroplasticity is part of what makes humans exceptional. Gomez-Robles et al., 2015. Think of how much the world has changed over the past 50 years, and how much more it will change in the next 50. We can barely imagine a past without smartphones, or a future where most people use self-driving cars. Our neuroplasticity enables us, more than other species, to adapt to our rapidly changing world. Roberts and Stewart, 2018. Cultural neuroscientists argue that experiencing different cultural traditions, beliefs, and rituals can create distinct behaviors and brain activation patterns. Gao et al., 2022, Pu et al., 2022. For example, people in the United States and Mexico tend to value expressing positive emotions, while people in China view emotional expression more negatively. Ma et al., 2018, Rikloska et al., 2015, Senft et al., 2021. Adapting to these different cultural norms helps explain why those in the United States and Mexico, compared with those in China, show more brain activation in emotion expression areas when viewing emotion-arousing photos. Hampton et al., 2021. A photo shows neuroscientist Marian Diamond smiling as she holds a brain at the front of a classroom. Marian Diamond, 1926 to 2017. Marian Diamond worked during an era when female scientists experienced tremendous discrimination. She overcame these biases and was among the first scientists to explore how experience changes the brain. Diamond et al., 1964. Her research, for example, showed how exposing rats to different environments produced changes in their brain structure. Diamond et al., 1966. Diamond also analyzed Albert Einstein's brain after his death, which helped unlock the neural mechanics of his mind. Diamond noted, "The brain is a 3-pound mass you can hold in your hand that can conceive of a universe 100 billion light-years across." Ask yourself, what skills did you practice the most as a child? Sports, music, cooking, video gaming? How do you think this affected your brain development? How will you continue to develop your brain with new learning and new skills? Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Neural communication. For scientists, it is a happy fact of nature that the information systems of humans and other animals operate similarly, so much so that you could not distinguish between small samples of brain tissue from a human and a monkey. This similarity allows researchers to study much simpler animals, such as squids and sea slugs, to discover how our neural systems operate. It allows them to study other mammals' brains to understand the organization of our own. Cars differ, but all have accelerators, steering wheels, and brakes. A space alien could study any one of them and grasp the operating principles. Likewise, animals differ, yet their nervous systems operate similarly. Neurons. LOQ 4-3. What are neurons, and how do they transmit information? Our body's neural information system is complexity built from simplicity. Its building blocks are neurons or nerve cells. Throughout life, new neurons are born and unused neurons wither away. O'Leary et al., 2014, Shores, 2014. To fathom our thoughts and actions, our memories and moods, we must first understand how neurons work and communicate. Neurons differ, but all are variations on the same theme. Figure 4.2. Each consists of a cell body and its branching fibers. The often bushy dendrite fibers receive and integrate information, conducting it toward the cell body. Poirasi and Papauzzi, 2020. From there, the cell's single-lengthy axon fiber passes the message through its terminal branches to other neurons, muscles, or glands. Figure 4.3. Dendrites listen. Axons speak. An illustration shows a motor neuron comprising a cell body, dendrites, axon, myelin sheath, and terminal branches of an axon. Figure 4.2. A motor neuron. Follow link for extended description of Figure 4.2. A motor neuron. A micrograph shows a network of neurons as an irregular webbed structure connecting cell bodies. Several layers of the network are visible, and a few smaller spherical structures appear at the top right. Figure 4.3. Neurons communicating. Our billions of neurons exist in a vast and densely interconnected web. As part of a fascinating electrochemical communication process, one neuron's terminal branches send messages to neighboring dendrites. Unlike the short dendrites, axons may be very long, projecting several feet through the body. A human neuron carrying orders from the brain to a leg muscle, for example, has a cell body and axon roughly on the scale of a basketball attached to a rope that's 4 miles, 6.4 kilometers, long. Much as home electrical wire is insulated, some axons are encased in a myelin sheath, a layer of fatty tissue that insulates them and speeds their impulses. As myelin is laid down up to about age 25, neural efficiency, judgment, and self-control grow. Nakamura et al., 2018, Van Munster et al., 2015. If the myelin sheath degenerates, multiple sclerosis results. Communication to muscles and brain regions slows. The result, diminished muscle control and sometimes impaired cognition. A photo shows actor Selma Blair at a Vanity Fair event, wearing a colorful dress and standing with the assistance of a cane. Managing multiple sclerosis. Actor Selma Blair's multiple sclerosis results from a loss of the myelin sheath that insulates her motor axons and speeds their neural impulses. She has discussed her challenges openly, including difficulty speaking and walking with a cane. Researchers are exploring myelin repair therapies for people with multiple sclerosis, Hujamans et al., 2019. Supporting these billions of nerve cells are spidery glial cells, glue cells. Neurons are like queen bees, on their own they cannot feed or sheath themselves. Glial cells are worker bees. They provide nutrients and insulating myelin, guide neural connections, and mop up ions and neurotransmitters. Glia also play a role in learning, thinking, and memory. By chatting with neurons, they participate in information transmission and memory fields, 2013, Martin et al., 2015. In more complex animal brains, the proportion of glia to neurons increases. Marion Diamond and other researchers' post-mortem analyses of Albert Einstein's brain did not find more or larger than usual neurons. They did, however, reveal a much greater concentration of glial cells than found in an average person's head, Diamond et al., 1985, Fields, 2004. Einstein's glial cells kept his brain abuzz with activity. The neural impulse. Neurons transmit messages when stimulated by our senses or by neighboring neurons. A neuron sends a message by firing an impulse, called the action potential, a brief electrical charge that travels down its axon. Depending on the type of fiber, a neural impulse travels at speeds ranging from a sluggish 2 miles, 3 kilometers, per hour to more than 200 miles, 320 kilometers, per hour. But even its top speed is 3 million times slower than that of electricity through a wire. We measure brain activity in milliseconds, thousandths of a second, and computer activity in nanoseconds, billionths of a second. Unlike a computer's nearly instantaneous reaction, your response to a sudden event, such as a child darting in front of your car, may take a quarter second or more. Your brain is vastly more complex than a computer, but slower at executing simple responses. And if you were an elephant whose round-trip message travel time from a yank on the tail to the brain and back to the tail is 100 times longer than that of a tiny shrew, your reflexes would be slower yet. Moore et al., 2010. I Sing the Body Electric. Walt Whitman, Children of Adam, 1855. Like batteries, neurons generate electricity from chemical events. The neuron's chemistry to electricity process exchanges ions, electrically charged atoms. The fluid outside an axon's membrane has mostly positively charged sodium ions. A resting axon's fluid interior, which includes both large, negatively charged protein ions and smaller, positively charged potassium ions, has a mostly negative charge. Like a tightly guarded facility, the axon's surface is selective about what it allows through its gates. We say the axon's surface is selectively permeable. This positive outside/negative inside state is called the resting potential. When a neuron fires, however, the security parameters change. The first section of the axon opens its gates, like a storm sewer cover flipping open, and positively charged sodium ions, attracted to the negative interior, flood in through the now open channels, figure 4.4. The loss of the inside/outside charge difference, called depolarization, causes the next section of axon channels to open, and then the next, like falling dominoes. This temporary inflow of positive ions is the neural impulse, the action potential. Each neuron is itself a miniature decision-making device performing complex calculations as it receives signals from hundreds, even thousands, of other neurons. The mind boggles when imagining this electrochemical process repeating up to 100 or even 1000 times a second. An illustration shows the three-step process of an action potential with a graph plotting the axon membrane's electrical charge against time. Figure 4.4 Action potential. Bodily sensations and actions. Detecting an ant crawling on your foot or kicking a soccer ball happen when our neurons are stimulated enough that their membrane's electrical charge reaches a threshold, 55 MV in this example. See graph. This prompts each of those neurons to fire an impulse in action potential which travels down its axon, see numbered drawings, and transmits a message to other neurons, muscles, or glands. Follow link for extended description of Figure 4.4 Action potential. Most neural signals are excitatory, somewhat like pushing a neuron's accelerator. Some are inhibitory, more like pushing its brake. If excitatory signals exceed the inhibitory signals by a minimum intensity, or threshold, see Figure 4.4, the combined signals trigger an action potential. Think of it this way: if the excitatory party animals outvote the inhibitory party poopers, the party's on. The action potential then travels down the axon, which branches into junctions with hundreds or thousands of other neurons or with the body's muscles and glands. What one neuron tells another neuron is simply how much it is excited. Francis Crick, The Astonishing Hypothesis, 1994. Neurons need short breaks, a tiny fraction of an eye blink. During a resting pause called the refractory period, subsequent action potentials cannot occur until the axon returns to its resting state. Then the neuron can fire again. Increasing the stimulation above the threshold will not increase the neural impulse's intensity. The neuron's reaction is an all or none response. Like guns, neurons either fire or they don't. How, then, do we detect the intensity of a stimulus? How do we distinguish a gentle touch from a big hug? A strong stimulus can trigger more neurons to fire, and to fire more often. But it does not affect the action potential's strength or speed. Squeezing a trigger harder won't make a bullet go faster. Ask yourself: does it surprise you to learn that your reaction time is slower than a computer's? Does this suggest which tasks might be more readily performed by computers? Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. How neurons communicate. LOQ 4-4. How do nerve cells communicate with other nerve cells? Neurons interweave so intricately that even with a microscope, you would struggle to see where one neuron ends and another begins. Scientists once believed that the axon of one cell fused with the dendrites of another in an uninterrupted fabric. Then British physiologist Sir Charles Sherrington, 1857–1952, noticed that neural impulses were taking an unexpectedly long time to travel a neural pathway. Inferring that there must be a brief interruption in the transmission, Sherrington drew on the Greek word synaptein, meaning fastened together, when he defined the meeting point between neurons as a synapse. All information processing in the brain involves neurons talking to each other at synapses. Neuroscientist Solomon H. Snyder, 1984. We now know that the axon terminal of one neuron is in fact separated from the receiving neuron by a tiny less than a millionth of an inch wide synaptic gap, or synaptic cleft. Spanish anatomist Santiago Ramón y Cajal, 1852–1934, marveled at these near unions of neurons, calling them protoplasmic kisses. Like elegant ladies air kissing so as not to muss their makeup, dendrites and axons don't quite touch, noted poet Diane Ackerman, 2004, p. 37. How do the neurons execute this protoplasmic kiss? sending information across the synaptic gap? The answer is one of the important scientific discoveries of our age. When an action potential reaches the button-like terminals at an axon's end, it triggers the release of chemical messengers, called neurotransmitters, figure 4.5. Within 1/10,000 th of a second, the neurotransmitter molecules cross the synaptic gap and bind to receptor sites on the receiving neuron as precisely as a key fits a lock. For an instant, the neurotransmitter unlocks tiny channels at the receiving site, and electrically charged atoms flow in, exciting or inhibiting the receiving neuron's readiness to fire. The excess neurotransmitters finally drift away, are broken down by enzymes, or are reabsorbed by the sending neuron, a process called reuptake. Some antidepressant medications partially block the reuptake of mood-enhancing neurotransmitters, figure 4.6. An illustration shows the process of communication between neurons. Figure 4.5, how neurons communicate. Follow link for extended description of figure 4.5, how neurons communicate. 3 illustrations labeled A through C show a synapse that illustrates the sending of messages, the receiving of messages, and the effect of Prozac on the communication between neurons, respectively. Figure 4.6, biology of antidepressants. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, are popularly prescribed antidepressants. They are designed to relieve depression by partially blocking the reuptake of the neurotransmitter serotonin. Shown here is the action of the SSRI Prozac. Follow link for extended description of figure 4.6, biology of antidepressants. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. How neurotransmitters influence us. LOQ 4-5. How do neurotransmitters influence behavior, and how do drugs and other chemicals affect neurotransmission? In their quest to understand neural communication, researchers have discovered several dozen neurotransmitters and as many new questions. Are certain neurotransmitters found only in specific places? How do neurotransmitters affect our moods, memories, and mental abilities? Can we boost or diminish these effects through drugs or diet? When it comes to the brain, if you want to see the action, follow the neurotransmitters. Neuroscientist Floyd Bloom, 1993. Other modules explore how neurotransmitters influence our hunger and thinking, depression and euphoria, addictions, and therapy. In this module, we'll see how neurotransmitters affect our motions and emotions. A particular brain pathway may use only one or two neurotransmitters, such as serotonin and dopamine, and certain neurotransmitters affect specific behaviors and emotions, Table 4.1. But neurotransmitter systems don't operate in isolation, they interact, and their effects vary with the receptors they stimulate. Table 4.1, commonly studied neurotransmitters and their functions. Neurotransmitter function. Examples of malfunctions. Acetylcholine, ACH. Enables muscle action, learning, and memory. With Alzheimer's disease, ACH-producing neurons deteriorate. Dopamine. Dopamine influences movement, learning, attention, and emotion. Oversupply linked to schizophrenia. Undersupply linked to tremors and decreased mobility in Parkinson's disease. Serotonin. Serotonin affects mood, hunger, sleep, and arousal. Undersupply linked to depression. Some drugs that raise serotonin levels are used to treat depression. Norepinephrine helps control alertness and arousal. Undersupply can depress mood. GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. A major inhibitory neurotransmitter. Undersupply linked to seizures, tremors, and insomnia. Glutamate. Glutamate. A major excitatory neurotransmitter, involved in learning and memory. Oversupply can overstimulate the brain, producing migraines or seizures. Endorphins. Neurotransmitters that influence the perception of pain or pleasure. Oversupply with opioid drugs can suppress the body's natural endorphin supply. A photo shows Ozzy Osbourne with other three Osbournes. Dependent upon dopamine. The neurotransmitter dopamine helps us move, think, and feel. Too little dopamine may produce the tremors and loss of motor control of Parkinson's disease, Wang et al., 2022. More than 8.5 million people worldwide have Parkinson's disease, including musical artist and reality show actor Ozzy Osbourne, shown here with the rest of the Osbournes, OUET al., 2021. One of the best understood neurotransmitters, acetylcholine, ACH, plays a role in learning and memory. ACH also enables muscle action, by acting as the messenger at every junction between motor neurons, which carry information from the brain and spinal cord to the body's tissues, and skeletal muscles. When ACH is released to our muscle cell receptors, the muscle contracts. If ACH transmission is blocked, as happens during some kinds of anesthesia and with some poisons, the muscles cannot contract and we are paralyzed. Candace Pert and Solomon Snyder, 1973, made an exciting discovery about neurotransmitters when they attached a harmless radioactive tracer to morphine, an opioid drug that elevates mood and eases pain. As the researchers tracked the morphine in an animal's brain, they noticed it was binding to receptors in areas linked with mood and pain sensations. But why would the brain have these opioid receptors? Why would it have a chemical lock, unless it also had a key to open it? Researchers soon confirmed that the brain does indeed produce its own naturally occurring opioids. Our body releases several neurotransmitter molecules similar to morphine in response to pain and vigorous exercise. These endorphins, short for endogenous produced within morphine, help explain good feelings such as the runner's high, the pain-killing effects of acupuncture, and the indifference to pain in some severely injured people, Booker et al., 2008, Fuss et al., 2015. But once again, new knowledge led to new questions. Ask yourself. Can you recall a time, perhaps after a workout, when you felt the effects of endorphins? How would you describe those feelings? Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. How drugs and other chemicals alter neurotransmission. If natural endorphins lessen pain and boost mood, why not increase this effect by flooding the brain with artificial opioids, thereby intensifying the brain's own feel-good chemistry? Because it would disrupt the brain's chemical balancing act. When flooded with opioid drugs such as heroin, morphine, and fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid, the brain to maintain its chemical balance may stop producing its own natural opioids. When the drug is withdrawn, the brain may then be deprived of any form of opioid, causing intense discomfort. For suppressing the body's own neurotransmitter production, nature charges a price. Drugs and other chemicals affect brain chemistry. Agonist molecules increase a neurotransmitter's action. Some agonists may increase the production or release of neurotransmitters, or block reuptake in the synapse. Other agonists may be similar enough to a neurotransmitter to bind to its receptor and mimic its excitatory or inhibitory effects. Some opioid drugs, then, are agonists and produce a temporary high by amplifying normal sensations of arousal or pleasure. Antagonists decrease a neurotransmitter's action by blocking production or release. An antagonist is enough like the natural neurotransmitter to occupy its receptor site and block its effect, but it is not similar enough to stimulate the receptor, rather like foreign coins that fit into, but won't operate, a vending machine. Botulin, a poison that can form in improperly canned food, causes paralysis by blocking ACH release. Small injections of botulin Botox smooth wrinkles by paralyzing the underlying facial muscles. Curare, a poison some South American indigenous people have applied to hunting dart tips, also occupies and blocks ACH receptor sites on muscles, producing paralysis in their prey. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. The nervous system. LOQ 4-6. What are the functions of the nervous system's main divisions, and what are the three main types of neurons? Neurons communicating via neurotransmitters make up our body's nervous system, a communication network that takes in information from the world and the body's tissues, makes decisions, and sends back information and orders to the body's tissues, Figure 4.7. A tree diagram shows the functional divisions of the human nervous system accompanied by two human figures depicting the peripheral and central nervous systems. Figure 4.7 The functional divisions of the human nervous system. Follow link for extended description of Figure 4.7 The functional divisions of the human nervous system. A quick overview: the brain and spinal cord form the central nervous system, CNS, the body's decision maker. The peripheral nervous system, PNS, is responsible for gathering information and transmitting CNS decisions to our body parts. Nerves, electrical cables formed from bundles of axons, link the CNS with the body's sensory receptors, muscles, and glands. The optic nerve, for example, bundles a million axons into a single cable carrying the messages from the eye to the brain. Mason and Candle, 1991. Information travels in the nervous system through three types of neurons. Sensory neurons carry messages from the body's tissues and sensory receptors inward, what biologists term afferent, to the brain and spinal cord for processing. Motor neurons, which are efferent, carry instructions from the central nervous system outward to the body's muscles and glands. Between the sensory input and motor output, information is processed via interneurons. Our complexity resides mostly in these interneurons. Our nervous system has a few million sensory neurons, a few million motor neurons, and billions of interneurons. The peripheral nervous system. Our peripheral nervous system has two components: somatic and autonomic. Our somatic nervous system enables voluntary control of our skeletal muscles. When your friend taps your shoulder, your somatic nervous system reports to your brain the current state of your skeletal muscles and carries instructions back, triggering your head to turn. Our autonomic nervous system, ANS, controls our glands and our internal organ muscles. The ANS influences functions such as glandular activity, heartbeat, and digestion. Autonomic means self-regulating. As with a self-driving car, we may consciously override the system, but it usually operates on its own, autonomously. The autonomic nervous system subdivisions serve two important functions, Figure 4.8. The sympathetic nervous system arouses and expends energy. Imagine an activity that alarms or challenges you, such as a longed-for job interview. Your sympathetic nervous system accelerates your heartbeat, raises your blood pressure, slows your digestion, raises your blood sugar, and cools you with sweat, making you alert and ready for action. When the stress subsides after the interview, your parasympathetic nervous system will produce the opposite effects, conserving your energy as it decreases your heartbeat, lowers your blood sugar, and enables you to rest and digest. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems work together, as accelerator and brake, to keep us in a steady internal state called homeostasis. More on this in the What Drives Us modules. An illustration shows the functions of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems with respect to different locations in the spine. Figure 4.8 The dual functions of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls the more autonomous, or self-regulating, internal functions. Its sympathetic division arouses the body and expends energy. Its parasympathetic division calms the body and conserves energy, allowing routine maintenance activity. For example, sympathetic stimulation accelerates heartbeat, whereas parasympathetic stimulation slows it. Follow link for extended description of Figure 4.8 The dual functions of the autonomic nervous system. Several years ago, IDM experienced my ANS in action. Before sending me into an MRI machine for a shoulder scan, the technician asked if I had issues with claustrophobia. "No, I'm fine," I assured her. Moments later, as I found myself on my back, stuck deep inside a coffin-sized box and unable to move, my sympathetic nervous system had a different idea. Claustrophobia overtook me. My heart began pounding, and I felt a desperate urge to escape. Just as I was about to cry out for release, I felt my calming parasympathetic nervous system kick in. My heart rate slowed and my body relaxed, though my arousal surged again before the 20-minute confinement ended. "You did well," the technician said, unaware of my ANS roller coaster ride. Ask yourself. Think back to a stressful moment when you felt your sympathetic nervous system kick in. What was your body preparing you for? Were you able to sense your parasympathetic nervous system's response when the challenge had passed? Retrieval practice. A text box shows an emergency alert message that might appear on a cell phone. It reads, "Emergency alert. Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter." This is not a drill. Slide for more. Ballistic stress. In 2018, Hawaiians received this terrifying alert, amid concerns about North Korean nuclear warheads. "We fully felt we were about to die," reported one panicked mother, Nagurni et 2018. 38 minutes later, the alert was declared a false alarm. Answers in Appendix E. The central nervous system. From neurons talking to other neurons arises the complexity of the central nervous system's brain and spinal cord. The brain enables our humanity, our thinking, feeling, and acting. Tens of billions of neurons, each communicating with thousands of other neurons, yield an ever-changing wiring web. By one estimate projecting from neuron counts in small brain samples, our brain has some 128 billion neurons, Feldman-Barrett, 2020. Although that's a lot, the world's 10 richest people, as we write, each have more dollars than brain cells. A cartoon shows a classroom with a blackboard. The teacher and students are depicted as bread slices with arms and legs. The word biology is written on the blackboard. The teacher says, "The body is made up of millions and millions of crumbs." Just as individual pixels combine to form a picture, the brain's individual neurons cluster into work groups called neural networks. To understand why, Stephen Koslin and Olivier Koenig, 1992, p. 12, have invited us to think about why cities exist. Why don't people distribute themselves more evenly across the countryside? Like people networking with people, neurons network with nearby neurons with which they can have short, fast connections. Each layer's cells connect with various cells in the neural network's next layer. Learning to play the violin, speak a foreign language, or solve a math problem occurs as experience strengthens connections. To paraphrase one neuropsychologist, neurons that fire together wire together, Heb, 1949. The other part of the CNS, the spinal cord, connects the peripheral nervous system and the brain. Ascending neural fibers send up sensory information, and descending fibers send back motor control information. The neural pathways governing our reflexes, our automatic responses to stimuli, illustrate the spinal cord's work. A simple spinal reflex pathway is composed of a single sensory neuron and a single motor neuron. These often communicate through an interneuron. The knee-jerk reflex, for example, involves one such simple pathway. A headless warm body could do it. Another neural circuit enables the pain reflex, figure 4.9. When your finger touches a flame, neural activity, excited by the heat, travels via sensory neurons to interneurons in your spinal cord. These interneurons respond by activating motor neurons leading to the muscles in your arm. Because the simple pain reflex pathway runs through the spinal cord and right back out, your hand jerks away from the candle's flame before your brain receives and responds to the information that causes you to feel pain. That's why it feels as if your hand jerks away not by your choice, but on its own. An illustration of a simple reflex shows the connection from the finger to the spinal cord and the brain. Figure 4.9a Simple reflex. Follow link for extended description of Figure 4.9a Simple reflex. Information travels to and from the brain by way of the spinal cord. Were the top of your spinal cord severed, you would not feel pain from your paralyzed body below. Nor would you feel pleasure. With your brain literally out of touch with your body, you would lose all sensation and voluntary movement in body regions with sensory and motor connections to the spinal cord below its point of injury. You would exhibit the knee-jerk reflex without feeling the tap. Men paralyzed below the waist may be capable of an erection, a simple reflex, if their genitals are stimulated. Gomez et al., 2017, Hess and Hoff, 2012. Women who are similarly paralyzed may respond with vaginal lubrication. But, depending on where and how completely their spinal cord is severed, they may be genitally unresponsive to erotic images and have no genital feelings. Kennedy and Over, 1990, Sipsky et al., 1999. To produce bodily pain or pleasure, the sensory information must reach the brain. If the nervous system be cut off between the brain and other parts, the experiences of those other parts are non-existent for the mind. The eye is blind, the ear deaf, the hand insensible and motionless. William James, Principles of Psychology, 1890. The endocrine system. LOQ 4-7. How does the endocrine system transmit information and interact with the nervous system? So far, we have focused on the body's speedy electrochemical information system. Interconnected with your nervous system is a second communication system, the endocrine system, figure 4.10. The endocrine system contains glands and fat tissue that secrete another form of chemical messenger. Hormones. Hormones travel through the bloodstream and affect other tissues, including the brain. When hormones act on the brain, they influence our interest in sex, food, and aggression. An illustration shows the different organs that make up the endocrine system and their respective functions with a joint schematic of a man and a woman. Figure 4.10 The endocrine system. Follow link for extended description of Figure 4.10 The endocrine system. Some hormones are chemically identical to neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers that diffuse across a synapse and excite or inhibit an adjacent neuron. The endocrine system and nervous system are therefore close relatives, both produce molecules that act on receptors elsewhere. Like many relatives, they also differ. The speedier nervous system zips messages from eyes to brain to hand in a fraction of a second. Endocrine messages trudge along in the bloodstream, taking several seconds or more to travel from the gland to the target tissue. If the nervous system transmits information with text message speed, the endocrine system delivers an old-fashioned letter. But slow and steady sometimes wins the race. Endocrine messages tend to outlast the effects of neural messages. Have you ever felt angry long after the cause of your angry feelings was resolved? Say, your friend apologized for their rudeness. You may have experienced an endocrine hangover from lingering emotion-related hormones. The persistence of emotions even without conscious awareness of what caused them was dramatically evident in one ingenious experiment. Brain-damaged patients unable to form new conscious memories watched a sad film and later a happy film. After each viewing, they did not consciously recall the films, but the sad or happy emotion persisted. Feinstein et al., 2010. In a moment of danger, the ANS orders the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys to release epinephrine and norepinephrine, also called adrenaline and noradrenaline. These hormones increase heart rate, blood pressure, and blood sugar, providing a surge of energy to power our fight or flight response. When the emergency passes, the hormones and the feelings linger for a few moments before the parasympathetic system calms you. The most influential endocrine gland is the pituitary gland, a pea-sized structure located in the core of the brain, where it is controlled by an adjacent brain area, the hypothalamus. More on that shortly. Among the hormones released by the pituitary is a growth hormone that stimulates physical development. Another is oxytocin, which enables orgasm, and, in women, labor contractions and, while nursing, milk flow. Oxytocin also aids social connection. For example, while bonding with their offspring through grooming, male baboons' oxytocin levels surge. Rincon et al., 2020. Children with autism spectrum disorder, who experience atypical social connections, have lower oxytocin levels than do their non-autistic peers. John and Jaegi, 2021. Pituitary secretions also direct other endocrine glands to release their hormones. The pituitary, then, is a master gland, whose own master is the hypothalamus. For example, under the brain's influence, the pituitary triggers your sex glands to release sex hormones. These in turn influence your brain and behavior. Getz et al., 2014. So, too, with stress. A stressful event triggers your hypothalamus to instruct your pituitary to release a hormone that causes your adrenal glands to flood your body with cortisol, a stress hormone that increases blood sugar. Sustained stress also increases adolescents and adults' risk for later depression. Kennis et al., 2020, Zajkowska et al., 2022. Stressed body rightward arrow depressed mind. A photo shows Christian Cooper with binoculars around his neck. Prejudice causes stress. Experiencing prejudice triggers the release of the stress hormone cortisol. Palmer-Bacon et al., 2020, Seaton and Ziders, 2021. In 2020, Christian Cooper experienced prejudice and stress while birdwatching in New York's Central Park. After politely asking a white woman to leash her dog, the woman yelled at him and threatened to call the police and tell them that an African American man is threatening my life. Near, 2020. A video of the stressful interaction went viral, attracting more than 40 million views in 2 days. The woman was later arrested on charges of filing a false police report. This feedback system, brain rightward arrow, pituitary rightward arrow, other glands rightward arrow, hormones rightward arrow, body and brain, reveals the intimate connection of the nervous and endocrine systems. The nervous system directs endocrine secretions, which then affect the nervous system. Conducting and coordinating this whole electrochemical orchestra is that flexible maestro we call the brain. Ask yourself, do you remember feeling the lingering emotional effects related to a hormonal response, such as anger or anxiety after a particularly upsetting event? How did it feel? How long did it last? Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Review. Module 4, Neural and Hormonal Systems. Learning Objectives. Test yourself. Answer these repeated learning objective questions on your own, before showing the answers here, or checking the answers in Appendix D, to improve your retention of the concepts. McDaniel et al., 2009, 2015. Terms and concepts to remember. Test yourself. Write down the definition in your own words, then check your answer. Biological psychology. Neuroplasticity. Neuron. Cell body. Dendrites. Axon. Myelin sheath. Glial cells, glia. Action potential. Threshold. Refractory period. All or none response. Synapse APS. Neurotransmitters. Reuptake. Endorphins. Agonist. Antagonist. Nervous system. Central nervous system, CNS. Peripheral nervous system, PNs. Nerves. Sensory, afferent, neurons. Motor, efferent, neurons. Interneurons. Somatic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system, ANS. Sympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system. Reflex. Endocrine system. Hormones. Adrenal glands. Pituitary gland. Module test. Test yourself. Answer the following questions on your own first, then show the answers here, or check your answers in Appendix E. Module 5,